haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint Community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Glory of Our Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups. Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to have you here today, and I just want to talk a little bit about this interview that I had with Sam Jahara. Sam kindly spoke to me about her years as a child living in the communes of the Indian guru Rajneesh in the 1980s. In this conversation, we started to explore how the Rajneesh movement was so similar in many ways to what the Centrepoint community, which operated in New Zealand in the 1980s, in the 1990s in Auckland was like, and which I was involved in as a child. So we had some real connection moments. This is part 1 of 3 episodes. I really encourage you to listen to them all. This interview was a little bit different from others on our show because it really was more of a conversation between 2 people who had some pretty hard experiences together. As a result, I'd caution listeners to take care. This episode deals with some difficult topics, including child sexual abuse and the sexualization of children. Please consider whether you're in a safe place to listen and be mindful of who is listening in the background. Okay, let's listen to episode 1 with Sam Jahara.
Hi, Sam. It's lovely to be here with you today. Could you introduce the listeners and the viewers to who you are?
Yes, I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very pleased to be talking to you. The time difference is huge, so I'm pleased we've made this work. I'm Sam Jahara. I'm a psychotherapist here in the UK, and when I was 6 years old, my parents became disciples of Rajneesh, later known as Osho. And from that moment, our lives really completely changed and became quite chaotic. We moved around a lot, and that was because my parents wanted to be with their so-called master as much as possible. So they were traveling to Pune, India. They were traveling to Oregon, also known as Rajneeshpuram. And me and my brother, as children, we were living in communes across Europe, and a lot of the time without our parents. So, that's my brief introduction.
That's an unusual life experience.
For sure.
Very unusual, and I suspect even unusual for a child of a high demand group as well. The travel and the multiple communities. I'm thinking of the people I've met and spoken to in New Zealand about growing up in a cult and that's, or a high demand group, and that in itself, the travel itself just jumps out at me as being quite different, the disconnection. So I first heard about Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh some years ago. I was vaguely aware of the red-clothed sannyasins, read about them in books, and I'd seen little images on television, but I didn't really become aware until I saw the Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country, and I suspect that that may be a touch point for a number of listeners and viewers as well. Could you give a little bit of an overview for people who either who have seen Wild Wild Country and may have a little bit of a taster, or know nothing at all about the Sasans, or I don't even know what we call it, the Osho movement, the Bhagwan movement, the Rajneesh movement, multiple names. Can you tell us a little bit about the movement and where they were, how they spread around the globe?
Yeah, for sure. And in thinking about this question, we also have to bear in mind that all gurus are pretty much the same. They start with some kind of movement that is entirely made up out of thin air. They are nobodies who then become somebodies because they are put there, or they put themselves there. So I can, and through the documentary, people will know who he was, but it really is just a different brand of another guru, and we know of lots of them, and Bert with Centrepoint, and so Osho. What was unique about him? Nothing in particular. He was from India. He was a charlatan. He thought he was very special, so he started running some retreats, meditation retreats in India, initially just with Indian followers, and he became quite big in the early 70s. Then in mid to late 70s, I think some Western disciples started arriving, and I think that's when things started to change significantly. It was also, the 70s was a time when all sorts of gurus started popping up, and Westerners flocked to mainly India to follow these gurus. It was quite fashionable as well. So the movement grew and grew, and it culminated in them building a city in a 60,000 acre plot in Antelope, Oregon in 1981.
Which was the Wild Wild Country documentary.
Exactly. Yes. So that's what they showed. But, before that, it was existing in India. Before that, in India, there were children living in the ashram. We are going to talk about the children here. So, in pretty precarious and unsafe conditions. So the ranch, as it was called, that place in Oregon, was a massive, grandiose, narcissistic project. And lo and behold, they got into conflict with the locals. They broke a number of laws. They built a whole city and put enormous amounts of money and energy and labor into it. And it all imploded after only 4 or 5 years.
And what kind of year was that? That was the early 80s, wasn't it?
1985, it all imploded, and he was deported back to India. His disciples were convicted of multiple criminal offenses, including mass poisoning, attempted murder. They broke a number of immigration rules, and funnily enough, or tragically, sex abuse was something that was never focused on. Unlike Centrepoint, nobody was ever charged for sexually abusing children. I don't think it ever came out. In fact, it's really only a recent thing that it's coming out. But anyway, that is the introduction. So there were communes and businesses all over Europe. I lived in 2 or 3 of those communes, but there were restaurants, there were discos, as we call them then. And these businesses in Europe generated a lot of money as well. So it was actually a business enterprise coated in, spirituality or spiritual growth.
And people will have recognised the way that the sannyasins, the followers, dressed and how they looked. I mean, I've heard a number of different people talk about seeing the sannyasins and kind of on the edge of their life. They remember them, and I believe that there was even a group here in New Zealand, though I don't know any details about that. But there are,
Yes, it was. The movement was huge. It's still pretty big. Unfortunately, it's spread all over the world, and the sannyasins, as his disciples were called, were known for wearing red and wearing a necklace called a mala with his photograph around their necks. So this is, and what else could I say? He was deported back to India in 1985 after the thing in Oregon imploded, and he died a few years later. So in the late 80s, early 90s.
But the worship continues. You still see his quotes on Instagram, and people still spread his books are still purchasable.
Yes, in mainstream bookstores here in the UK, you can purchase his books still, and he's seen by some people as this wise spiritual guru, master, whatever. Yes, a lot of people are pretty clueless about who he really was.
Yes, and just to be clear, that's not your view at all.
That's not my view at all. No,
exactly.
I'm very glad he's dead, to be honest.
Yes. Okay. Could you tell us how your family in particular came to be involved with Rajneesh, and how your involvement as a family changed and developed over time?
Yeah, so my parents were young parents, pretty clueless, I would say, looking back now. And I think pretty naive. I grew up in Brazil, and I think the guru appealed to the educated middle classes, and as the movement was spreading around the world, it came to Brazil as well. First, it was quite small, but big enough that my parents came in contact with it, and I think my parents became involved, like many other people, to rebel against that sort of traditional middle class values, lifestyle. They got involved at the point where just after my brother was born, my father had quite a prestigious job. They had just bought a home, so we were pretty settled as a nuclear family. And at that point, it was when they both got involved with Rajneesh. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty quick that they got rid of, they I think rented out or sold their flat. I was taken out of school. We flew to America, bought a motorhome, traveled across America as a four in a motorhome for a year, traveling to Oregon, staying with Sasans along the way. My mother did her best to keep me in school, so I went to several different schools in different states in America. I spoke no English, so it was pretty hard, both living with strange people, living in a motorhome, and then being, put in and out of school. It was just crazy, really.
Crazy.
Absolutely. So at that point, I lost everything, really. Home, family, school, dog. Everything I knew was just kind of taken away, and there we were into this completely new world.
And many of your protective factors, I imagine, like grandparents and adults who are watching over you, like teachers and family friends.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Yes, the things that really hold a child together psychologically. So then we all had to dress in red as well, which was, we were already different enough, having moved to America, living in a motorhome. We also dressed in red, wearing the necklace with his picture around our necks. And so that was an added factor. And it was unsettling, to say the least. And I lived in some of the European communes in Holland, Germany, and the longest here in the UK, which was a place called Medina, isolated in the middle of the countryside. And pretty beautiful, but horrible place for children, I think, to be in. Yeah.
I think we'll come back to Medina later.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know what ages you were as you were travelling around America in the motorhome, and then you were in the communes in Europe. What kind of ages were you?
Yes, so from 6 to 11, the 5 years.
All right, so that just sort of melded all one into the other, those ages. And you were 9, I think, when you were in Medina?
Yes, 9 to 10. Yeah, so this coincided. This was the time of Rajneesh Puram in Oregon, and this was the time of the communes in Europe. I mean, some of them continued, but that's where they sent the children during the ranch times.
Mm. Right, yeah, because that's the thing. When I was watching Wild Wild Country, I kept on asking, where were the children? So the children actually weren't there. Is that what you're saying?
They were there. They were there. Some children were there. Yes, they were. They set up schools or creches for children, but there were lots of children because there were lots of people following him. So not all the children could be in Oregon, and so they set up some commune schools to send the other children. But most of us rarely or ever never saw our parents.
Mm. And so you're describing the 6 to age 11, so 5 years of this quite lot of movement for yourself, but also for your parents, moving and jumping around all over the place and following. Where I mean, I don't understand why they were moving all the time. I mean, that's an interesting question. Why the moving? Why? Do you know?
Well, I think there are several reasons for that. First of all, they wanted to travel, and then there was a good reason to travel. So one aspect is that they were young, and they had young children, and they wanted to see the world. But that wasn't really the main motivation. The main motivation became seeing the world, but also spending time with other Rajneesh disciples, and spending time in communes, and going to the ranch, and going to Pune, and leaving us here, there, and everywhere, or taking us with them. So it became a very nomadic lifestyle, which was very much encouraged by the cult, by the way. So I think there was an adventurous part in them. They wanted to throw it all. I don't know if they wanted to. Part of them wanted to throw it all away and go and explore the world, and it didn't, really matter that they had children. They could just take the children with them, or just leave the children somewhere. And that really fed into the cult mentality, which was, you can do whatever you want, and children are they're no hindrance. That's that kind of entitled mentality, and ignorant as well, because of course that wasn't good for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing that jumps to my mind as well is lack of attachment. If you're constantly moving and uprooting, not only do the children not have an opportunity to attach, but the adults don't as well. And I'm wondering, was everyone moving, or were there difficulties that were solved by moving, or were they actually uprooted and moved so that they didn't form attachments? I mean, I'm curious about that. We don't need to spend any time on that, but I've heard about this. It didn't happen at Centrepoint. Everyone was in one place, but I've heard about this in other cult groups, like the 12 tribes, people constantly being picked up and moved at a point where maybe relationships start to form, people start to ask questions. So I'm curious about that, but we don't need to go into that.
Well, just to say, shortly, that the settling wasn't encouraghed.
Exactly. That's what I mean by attachment.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what Osho Rajneesh Bhagwan, multiple names, what he stood for, what his values were, what the belief system was, and where the elements of control and indoctrination came into that. If you can speak to that, it's a big question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think he appealed to Westerners because it was unusual for an Indian guru to encourage sexual hedonism, for example, and to be in favor of capitalism. Most Indian gurus, I think, were, even though, they were at least overtly preaching the opposite of that. Normally celibacy and living quite modest lives, although that I think also changed. So he was quite lavish and encouraging of sexual freedom. He spoke against the nuclear family, and the communes separated children and parents. It was coated in a sort of package of free love and spirituality, but essentially it was, it was whatever he needed to preach in order to self-serve. But he was pretty clever in doing that, because he was extremely well-educated and well-read, and I think he used that to be pretty manipulative and to seduce people who were also very educated. And so he praised sexual freedom and capitalism, and that appealed to Western disciples because it was very much a mentality of you can have it all, which was very seductive. So they could have sex, money, and spirituality. And so he was basically selling all of that, which was, as you can imagine, oh yeah, gosh, who doesn't want all these things? And it's like the promised land.
Yeah.
Without consequences. Absolutely, yeah. And so I think it was he encouraged people to abdicate responsibility, and he spoke against marriage, children, anything that involved allegiance to anything other than to him. And he was pretty successful in doing that. He famously owned 99 Rolls Royces, which were given to him by very wealthy disciples, and he wore diamond watches, and he couched it as a confrontation of other religions who looked after the poor. So he was always kind of playing on his he said he never. Of course, he never said he was seduced by money, which he hugely was seduced by money. But he just said that, I'm beyond everything. I'm beyond money. I'm beyond sex. I'm beyond, all these material and mundane things of the world. And whilst, of course, he was not celibate, he was abusing his female disciples. He was living quite a lavish lifestyle, and also people had to pay quite a lot of money to go and stay in these communes and in Oregon and in India, and had to work for free for long hours. So yeah, that what was he preaching? He was a charlatan. He was preaching all sorts of rubbish.
He was preaching things that fundamentally met his own particular needs and interests and desires.
Yes, and I think for the disciples, it was seductive because it, in a way, it also met their own narcissistic desires for money and sex and power and so on and so forth. So it was, I think, in a way, convenient to give it to him and to take some for themselves, and to live in this way. So it was, in a way, I mean, perhaps it's simplistic to say it was convenient, because a lot of people lost a lot during those times. But I think it was very permissive, and it suited a lot of people.
Absolutely. So those are the things that people may have been gaining, but where was the elements of control that kept them trapped? I mean, I know you were a child at the time, and I was a child in a similar organisation, so it was hard for me to see the culty things at the time. So I think we bring our adult selves to that question, reflecting back and looking back and going, how were people kept in? Can you answer that? Can you speak to the cultic dynamics, the coercive control, the indoctrination? That
Yes. So with I think many parallels with other cults, in the sense that the more special you think you are as a group, the more you are led to believe that, or you make your disciples believe that the world out there is that people are less aware, that they are never going to achieve enlightenment, you can only achieve enlightenment if you follow this particular guru. If you idealize him, if he becomes your master, then whatever he says goes. So that's the first trap, because as you know from your own experience of Centrepoint, whatever the leader says, it excuses all sorts of behaviors. Because they are the owners of the truth, and as long as you follow them, you believe that they are enlightened and special, and that you're going to be enlightened as a result of following them, that is going to be, let's say, your salvation in life. So there you're already kind of pretty hooked for life, because attaining salvation or attaining enlightenment is something that is really unattainable. So you can spend your whole life looking for it and believing that you're only going to get it from this particular person. And he did a pretty good job of selling it like that.
Yeah, he's aligned himself with he's not aligning himself with a deity in the same way, because it's a different an Eastern worldview, not like Christianity where you can say that I've got a direct line to God, but he's aligning himself through calling himself enlightened, to say that he's on a spiritual plane that's well above and beyond the normal human. So he is still connecting himself to the eternal, which is the ultimate. It's the ultimate truth, isn't it? And you can't get any higher than that.
Exactly. And so this was a trap that people were in. You know, if I meditate if I do all his meditations, if I do as much meditation as possible, if I attend all these therapy groups, that you have to pay handsomely for, by the way, then I am increasing my chances. The more time I spend with him, the more I will increase my chances of becoming enlightened. So that was what the trap my parents were in. The more they just wanted to spend as much time with him and in his communes and in his ashram as possible, because that was the means to attain enlightenment.
Yeah, and the more you invest, the more deep you've traveled into this way of being, that if any evidence to the contrary starts to reveal itself, the harder it is to see it, because of the investment, which is growing and growing and growing, particularly if you cause harm at the same time, because the investment here is not just personal investment, but it's also the neglect and the loss and the losses that your whole family, but particularly you as children, were experiencing. It has to, you have to be seeking enlightenment. You have to believe that, because the losses start to mount up, don't they?
Yes, and they were the owners of the truth, let's say, and so and everyone in society was seen as simple and unenlightened and unspiritual, and we as children were very much indoctrinated like that. So when we came back to see our families in Brazil, there was a distance there, because we were made to believe that they were they were not as good as the people that followed Osho. So,
which is a particular tragedy, because those people were the ones who could have meet some of those needs that you were desperate to have met. I've heard a number of Centrepoint children talk about going to see their families in the weekend. So maybe one parent was at Centrepoint and the other parent was out, and or teachers, people who could have helped or supported them, but they did exactly what you're describing, distanced themselves, and expressed the propaganda themselves to these potential support people, and those support people just kind of had to believe, even with all their own worries or concerns. Are you okay? Yes, of course I'm okay. It's wonderful.
Yes, we were made to believe it was wonderful and that we had this privileged life. But of course, inside you feel completely the opposite of that, right? Because no child wants to be away from their extended family and from the things their friends, their school, their pets, their belongings. I mean,
their culture, their language.
Their culture, their language, their clothes, the clothes that you make that you can't wear anymore. Everything, really. And I think there was a very entitled aspect to this belief system, which was then, I think sannyasins were very much thought that they should impose this belief system on other people as well. And I think that's why the Rajneesh Puram imploded the way it did, because they were so entitled on a very, very large scale, and thought the locals were really, that they were just inferior people, even though they came to their land, and they could have built a lot of bridges, but they didn't at all, because they really believed that they were the chosen people.
So many similarities with
like so many other cults. Yeah.
The same thing happened in Albany and Centrepoint. All these enormous conflicts between the locals and the people in Centrepoint, and a sense of, I remember that entitlement, an arrogance, sort of a, we're better than you. Yes.
I don't know if I answered your question fully in terms of the cult aspect and the indoctrination. I think that pretty much sums it up. I'm sure there's more to say.
Oh, there'll be so much
about
more to
that.
Say. Yeah, we're only scratching the surface here, really. But moving on to I want to go back to the children. When I think I said it earlier, when I was watching Wild Wild Country, I thought, what about the children? I remember watching and going, waiting. How many series are there? 4, 5? Watching it and waiting for the moment where someone would talk about the children, and it never happened. And there were so many parallels with Centrepoint, and I also knew at the time when watching it, or maybe it came out later, that Bert Potter, who was the leader of Centrepoint Community, where I personally had some experience as a child, had visited Puna in the late 1970s. He had been watching the Sasans, and he had been watching Rajneesh, and learnt apparently how to be a guru in that environment. And then he went to Esalen. I saw a lot of similarities between how sannyasins run things in the community in Puna, how they lived, what they valued. And I thought, what about the children? They weren't even mentioned. And then there was an article published in the Sunday Star Times in Britain in September of 2022, which revealed for the first time that children were abused in Osho's ashrams. And that article, which I know you are very familiar with, really a number of things jumped out which were parallels to me for Centrepoint. It said that adults preyed on young girls, young people were pressured from an early age to engage in sex, just like at Centrepoint. Osho taught that the nuclear family was harmful to children, and they were discouraged. Children were discouraged to spend time with their children, and parental ties were discouraged, just the same thing that happened at Centrepoint. Sex was everywhere, just like at Centrepoint. There was a strong focus on therapy, and there were therapy groups. And in the therapy groups, there was a lot of nudity in group sex, just like what happens at Centrepoint. Adults were encouraged to abandon their responsibilities in pursuit of self, just like at Centrepoint. That there was a teaching that actualization could be achieved through sex. At Centrepoint, it was particularly Bert, having sex with Bert, that was key. Converts were educated and young, just like at Centrepoint. And then eventually jail time for the leadership, just like at Centrepoint. Though I'm not sure if there was a lot of people convicted from that. And I think that's the key thing here around about the sexual abuse. That sexual abuse at Centrepoint, many of the people who actually caused harm were convicted, although I think there's probably an enormous number of convictions that haven't happened. But in the case of the Rajneesh group, we've had nothing.
Nobody was ever convicted for sexual offences.
Can you tell
to
us
this day?
About, yeah. And that is very chilling when I think particularly about people who are still active, potentially, no consequences.
That's right.
Can you tell us about the sexualization of children in the Rajneesh communes?
Yes, so the similarities, the list, everything that you just named. Yes, so that's why we connected, right? Because the similarities are staggering. Bert took a particular brand of. It is chilling because it's almost as if he opened another branch of, in New Zealand or something like that. The similarities are staggering, and the damage is on a par. And having listened extensively to the abuse that happened at Centrepoint, the abuse that happened in the Rajneesh communes is on a par, if not worse, because it was very spread out and a much bigger operation. I think it was very unethical, the makers of that documentary, to not investigate or mention the children, because they would have known that there were children there. So, and to not ask questions. I think that's shocking and staggering, because that's really only half the story.
There's a missed opportunity to me, and when I, as an informed individual who recognised the similarities, I couldn't help but ask the question, and I couldn't help but assume. I just watched it, and I was like, there must have been extensive, severe abuse of children, yet it's not mentioned. And what that said to me was, what it would say to an uninformed member of the public, it would say that it wasn't there. That's what it said. It wasn't there. By omission, it said it wasn't there. And that is almost worse than no examination.
That's right. And if you imagine that in that very place, that they, it was quite a well-made but very sensationalist documentary. They failed to include the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable, where were they? They were sleeping in large dorms without their parents, girls and boys with very little supervision, and adults could just walk in and out of their dorms whenever they pleased. A lot of men walked in and out of those dorms on a regular basis, on a daily basis, multiple times a day. So that's what they didn't show in the documentary. The children were being severely neglected and were made to believe that they were having a great life, that they were free, that they had all this space and they had lots of fun. And I'm sure children were having fun too. But, when you're being sexually abused, or when you're being intruded upon, or when you're being made to work for lots and lots of hours every day, how much fun can you actually have? Or how much of that fun is actually really genuine fun? How much can you let go if you don't feel safe?
Exactly. And I just think so little protection. And wherever there's unprotected children, there's opportunity for a predator.
Abuse was rife, and your children were unprotected, and their parents were not around. Parents were made to believe that the children were being well looked after. But you choose to believe that as well, don't you? And so no convictions for the pedophiles or abusers, as we said, to this day. And I think with regards to the sexualization of children, no care or understanding about child development. So that's quite key, including child sexual development. They're almost thinking that children's sexual development is like adult sexual development, so because we were supposed to be little adults and just
exactly. Little
behave
adults.
like
little adults is the word that just jumped to mind, and then you said it, because that's exactly how children at Centrepoint were treated, like little adults. Just the same.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And, the environment was overwhelming, over-sexualized, and very confusing for a child. Children are socialized to model themselves in the adults around them. So they will do things that are seen as acceptable, things that they get praise for.
Absolutely.
Right? And no one there was capable of explaining normal sexual development to a child, and to protect them for seeing and for being part of things children should not take part in or witness. This was coming from the top, the lack of care and discourses about children being exposed to sex. He was talking all sorts of rubbish, as Bert from Centrepoint was about sex. It didn't have any bloody clue about children.
No idea.
And everyone followed whatever rubbish came out of the guru's mouth, which was very dangerous. And I think children were an inconvenience for the guru and for the adults that were there to look after their healing and look after their fun and to have lots of sex and whatever else would get them to enlightenment. And so yeah, absolutely. And so that reminder that people have responsibility, they didn't want any of that, right? Because all your responsibility is given to the guru. You surrender. So you're supposed to surrender to the guru. So you give all responsibility to him, which is an extremely dangerous place for you and your children to be in. Mm. And children are neglected and treated like little adults, including it's much easier for them to be abused, right? Because they are there, they're choosing to have sex, of course, and they're old enough to make those decisions, even though they're only like
it's nonsense. Yeah. I just want to dig into neglect, because neglect is a word that I think, unless you experience it, you don't really understand what neglect is. And it's minimized. I think we society can kind of understand physical abuse and they can kind of understand sexual abuse, but neglect, I don't think they get. And I think about myself wandering around Centrepoint with no adults anywhere, or adults that are around completely distracted and uninterested, and just the sense of preoccupation from the adults. And so trivial little day-to-day matters like needing something for school, or not being able to find a pair of shoes, or wanting to be tucked into bed, or whatever it is that the child needs was missed, just not even seen. And I think neglect in a context where there's not a lot of risk is pretty bad, but neglect when there's extraordinary risk, it's just opening the door for the wolves to come in.
Absolutely. And there was a belief that children were responsible for themselves, that they could look after themselves. So it's almost as if they completely neglected the notion that children need care and protection. They forgot. So back in society, it was very clear that children needed care and protection. And as soon as they're in the commune, they forget that children need care and protection from their parents. So that's how dangerous an environment it was. And neglect, it's like children were forgotten, and the documentary we spoke about before, the children weren't there because they were forgotten. And I think for decades afterwards, nobody spoke about the children because they were forgotten. So we were constantly forgotten, constantly forgotten. We're just kind of, I don't know, part of the furniture somehow, but also used as object for adult pleasure and desire. I mean, it's so I think the very painful aspect to this for all of us is that we just did not matter. We did not matter to anyone there. It was like people were on drugs. They were in a daze. And some of them were actually on drugs, right? But they were, if they were not taking drugs, they were in this kind of dazed state from all these stupid meditations and all these therapy groups and all these discourses, and all the work. So between working and doing all this worship rubbish, that like we were just in the way.
Yeah. And I'm thinking right now of our listeners, and I'm thinking that this is moving into the bit that's hard between you and I, Sam, because we were victims of this environment that was created by a guru and his followers, and then all the people around, the top followers, and then all the people around. And we were victims of this. And I've tried, and I know that you absolutely try as well, to think of it not just as the child survivor, but as a compassionate individual who is in a caring role as well. But what I find really hard is this moment between the two of us right now, where we go right into the tragedy of the loss, and we feel it. And I struggle to feel compassion in that moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I really do struggle with that.
And so you should, I think.
Mm.
You know, it would be strange if you didn't, from my point of view, because it's, you know, why should we have compassion if where there's no repair, where there's no attempt to repair, where there's no acknowledgement, where there's no engagement with these very difficult themes. I feel all the compassion for people who make mistakes in life. We all make mistakes, you know, but an unwillingness to look back and say, I've made mistakes. I've really messed up here. I am so ashamed and mortified about what I've done, and I will do anything to make up to you. Or, you know, let's engage in a dialogue of, let me listen to your pain. I mean, anything that is what I feel compassion for. I cannot feel compassion for people who are so defensive, who are not willing to go there, who come up with half excuses of, I'm sorry you felt that way. This is not an apology, by the way. I am sorry you felt this way, but I was having a great time. I mean, that's just so insulting. You know, it's so insulting. Or even, it was horrible what happened to you, but I'm so glad I had this experience. I was just like the stuff I've heard over the years. I can you know, I can talk about this for a long time because I've heard it all. I've heard it all, and you've heard it all.
Absolutely. You know. There was in the Commune podcast, which was you've listened to, which was all about Centrepoint, which was produced by Stuff last year or the year before. There was a journalist in that who wanted to come and share a story of his positive experience at Centrepoint, just so that everyone was aware that some people had some good times. And I listened to that, and I just almost felt like vomiting. Almost felt like it is it relevant? Is it relevant that someone had a good time when there were dormitories of children being visited in the night by predators? Is it even relevant?
I am going to say to all these people who are out there writing books and talking about their great experiences in ashrams and communes where children were sexually abused and harmed, we do not care about your positive experiences. Mm-hmm. I don't want to hear about it. I will never read about it. I don't think it's appropriate to be writing about these things, to be talking about these things. Keep it to yourself. Keep your mouth shut. Don't write about it. It's offensive. You know, that's what I want to say to these people. You had a great time? Okay, just keep it to yourself. You know, just keep it to yourself, your great time that you had there. Because whilst you were having a great time, we really weren't.
Yeah. We're going to pause there, Sam.
Whoa, that finished pretty heavy. I know. I remember how it was pretty heavy at the end of that episode. What do you guys think of how that conversation went?
Yeah, that was deep. I was really moved, actually, just the way you two spoke and connected and shared your experiences. And again, it's always incredible, the similarity. But yeah, you guys really, I felt like, really privileged to listen in on someone's personal experiences. And, you know, you just can't go past that ending where it talks about, yeah, you might have had nice experience living in that group. Good for you, almost, you know. But quit writing about it, telling everybody about it, because when there is so much harm, that just adds to the harm. It is rude and insulting and offensive to suggest, you know, that other people's experiences are somehow invalid because you had a marvelous time, and it's not appropriate.
Yeah, that was very challenging, because I think that really challenged me, because one of the things that I personally really strive to do is to not be black and white about any narrative, about any particular group or anything. And I say that as something that's come at great personal cost to me, because I feel in similar shoes. When I reflect on my experiences with the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, it would be very easy for me to allow the pain to subsume any other view of them. And certainly, especially in the earlier years, I would really struggle if I heard somebody say something positive about them, because I'd be like, well, I'd be like, well, that's like saying that murderer over there is really kind to his cat. Like, I don't care that he's kind to his cat. He's a murderer, like when you're in a place of extreme pain, like she said, you don't want to hear about the good things. And yet, I guess as the years have gone by, I have tried really hard to be more moderate with how I view harmful people and harmful groups, and try really hard to remind myself that not all people or all groups are all bad. So I found that really challenging, but I could hear her her pain around. I guess it's that thing of it's in particular if someone says, oh, I had a good time, but at the same time they invalidate your harm. That's different.
That is different. It's different from someone who says, I recognize the harm that was done to me, and I can also appreciate there were some good things. That's perfectly entitled to. Like, I think about the different kinds of groups though. Kaz, would it ever be appropriate in the Centrepoint story? It's a group that was specifically set up, the beliefs of it was about sex, underage sex, the normalization of sex. Could you have lived there?
No, not quite. It was this is the debated topic actually. Plenty of adults do say, I didn't see any of that and I wasn't aware of it. Like, that's a strong narrative which many children really like. I mean, I don't think I know a single Centrepoint child who wasn't abused in some form. So that lands hard. Lands really hard. But that's not why they were there. They were there for personal development and growth. Yes. And the sex component kind of creeped in over time and became increasingly sort of promiscuous and extreme. And I don't know what it was like to join in, say, early 80s after things had been going for a while, and it was full on intense. You said before, things tend to wind up. But I think the issue here is when you're having a conversation and you're trying to talk about restoration, acknowledgement, recognition, like that's actually hard won recognition. And someone is just wanting to go, I had a good time. I don't know.
It's context, right?
It's you're ruining my memory of this place.
Yeah.
And I think we've said before that on the show is that when you're going somewhere and the weakest member of your group is getting left behind, you need to walk at the pace of the weakest group. And when you're not recognizing and considering the most vulnerable of them all, and you're kind of ignoring their inconvenient story, and then you're saying I had a good time,
and to perpetuate a lie that you want to believe, because perhaps actually you do feel some guilt and shame and whatever you.
And I think the thing you're saying, Lindy, is you try hard to hear the stories of everyone involved and recognize and be balanced. I don't think we're talking about those sorts of people.
No.
Yeah, right. You're talking about when people are using their good time as a block or a defense against it, like to help them to stay in denial about these awful things that have gone on. That's right.
And they might talk about all the good things, and then they might just roll off a sentence like, and all the other things that we know that weren't so great about the group. Just, rolling up.
Yeah.
Deep trauma and abuse in a flip-off sentence like it's lightweight. It's incredibly insulting and harming.
And if you've had a rigorous process of acknowledging and hearing the victims, I'm thinking about like something rigorous like the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa, where people actually said the things and they got heard, well, then I don't know, maybe I'd feel a bit different about it. Yeah. I'd feel a bit different about saying, gosh, and actually, if you had a good time, I'm sorry, but you were endorsing and enabling the group to continue. You were paying your fees for the course, and you were getting to have a good experience, kind of at the expense of the victims.
That hurts.
So I think you actually do have a responsibility as a more powerful person in a group that had institutionalized abuse. If you're going to say anything, you've got to say it with some understanding of the cost to the less vulnerable, more vulnerable people. And I think that's what you're saying. People who just want to go, I had a good time, like, who cares? You're not adding anything here, and you're shutting down victims.
Yes, that is so fascinating. Yeah, that concept that actually by staying silent or continuing to support the good aspects, you are part of the problem. You're the bystander problem. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Look, she made some really interesting comments about like gurus, about being nobodies who make themselves important, and that really just struck me about that fashion concept of following a guru, but it just being a business enterprise cloaked in spirituality. And I find those concepts just, and you've spoken about this before, Lindy. Why does it always seem like the cults we're talking about are kind of Christian religious groups? Well, actually, no, there are, business groups cloaked in spirituality everywhere, all kinds. It's just it's a way in. It's a way of selling a dream and a vision.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. For me, it was fascinating hearing things like that every member had a necklace with the guru's image on it. I found that fascinating. Just the way that people use symbolism or images or whatever to, like, even though he was a human being, it was like he completely had this deity status and this protection status, like a charm. Yeah, I found that really fascinating.
The adoration that's necessary. Something that, again, that struck me, and there was a lot in there that I really really could think on and reflect on. But she talked about the investment that you put into these groups and joining, and your investment grows over time. Maybe it's that you've helped build a certain part of a physical project, or perhaps you've spent a lot of money buying courses, so your investment grows over time. But you believe you're seeking enlightenment, and so you feel like you are building in an investment, but the losses stack up. And I just think that's like, they do stack up, and at some point, there's this weighing in the balance. Should I leave now when I've wasted 50 years of my life? The investment and the losses.
This idea that that's a force to reckon with, pushing against someone's sunk costs in the group, and your difficult, incongruous, really challenging to kind of go, your dream, your utopia, your vision for a better life has left me with 30 years of pain and heartache.
Yep.
That's they really don't mix. You've got to move as a first generation or someone who was recruited to follow the dream, and then there's this devastation in its wait as a consequence, particularly for their children. You've got to move out of that. You've got to move into a different place where you stop worshipping the guru, where you let go of that, whatever. I don't even know how to articulate what that is in a person that makes it impossible for them to look at what they've done when their child comes to them.
Well, I think that Sam actually hit the nail on the head. She said, when you're in these groups, you somehow forget that your children need care and protection, and we just did not matter. And so that's part of what happens in a group, the lack of sleep, the commitment to the ideology, the leader, the children just do not matter. So when people leave these groups, you can't actually expect that relationship, parent-child relationship, to just heal itself.
Be normal. Yeah.
There's a lot there that needs to go on.
Yeah, I mean, you brought it up early on, Kaz, and I was like, man, I agree with that when you said about just this like kind of severe lack of attachment that the whole environment, or in her case in particular, with being moved around a lot, and so many different schools and so many different adults caring for you, it's like, these children do not have positive, secure attachment figures, and we know how disruptive that is to a young person's developing, or a child's developing, sense of safety and identity and security in the world. Like, that was so heartbreaking. And then to hear them, to hear you both reflecting on this recent documentary, which had an opportunity to give a voice to the children, and had just somehow completely missed that. It's like, what's this about? It's that I found that really sad and really strange.
Oh yeah.
Actually, I'm really looking forward to part 2 of your interview, because I expect that there's going to be a further discussion around the children and impacts on children. So why don't we invite our listeners to join us for part 2 of Sam's episode, and there will be a part 3 as well. Each part just has its own special flavour. So let's call an end to this one. Thanks for joining us today. Please share us and encourage people to listen into Cult Chat, and we look forward to you joining us in the next episode. Bye everyone.
See you later.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you, and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.